There is a mystery that has echoed through the ages, from the deserts of Sinai to the prisons of Rome, from the caves of prophets to the lonely Gethsemane, where even the Son of God cried out alone. And that mystery is this: why are the chosen ones always isolated? There is a sacred principle woven through the tapestry of Scripture and time itself. Separation precedes revelation. It is not merely a pattern, it is a divine protocol. Before God speaks deeply, he separates intentionally. Before he reveals himself, he removes distractions. He isolates. He pulls apart. He calls the chosen away from the crowd, the noise, the familiar. Why? Because revelation, the kind that changes destinies, the kind that births movements and alters history, cannot come where the air is crowded with the voices of the world. Look through the pages of ancient truth, and you will see it again and again. Abraham was called to leave his land, his relatives, his father's house. Before he could become the father of nations, he had to walk alone with God into the unknown. The revelation of the covenant, the vision of the stars, the promise of the impossible, none of it came until after the separation. It was in the solitude that God spoke. Moses grew up in a palace, but his destiny was not formed there. His revelation came not in Egypt's glory, but in Midian's obscurity. 40 years of tending sheep in the wilderness, stripped of title, stripped of influence, stripped of status. Why? Because before he could carry the fire of the burning bush, he had to be emptied of Egypt. He had to be separated. Then, and only then, did the bush burn and the voice call his name. It is the divine paradox. We crave connection, but God begins his greatest works in disconnection. We long for affirmation, yet God chooses to speak when no one else is around to hear. Even Elijah, the mighty prophet, had to be pulled from the battlefront and placed in a cave. The fire, the wind, and the earthquake passed, but the voice, the revelation, came in the stillness, in the isolation. There, alone, Elijah heard the whisper of the Almighty. This is not punishment, this is preparation. God is not pushing you away. He is drawing you in. When he separates you, it is because he desires to speak to you. And not just speak, he desires to reveal. Revelation is not information. Revelation is transformation. It is not meant to fill your mind, it is meant to mark your soul. And for something that holy, he must clear the room. He must shut the door. He must take you to the mountain or the cave or the desert where only his voice remains. Even the Messiah followed this pattern. Before he began his ministry, before the miracles and the crowds and the teaching on the hills, he was led by the Spirit into the wilderness, not by accident, not by failure, by divine direction. Why? Because the Son of God would not speak the word to the world until he had met the word in the solitude. Separation preceded revelation. And when he emerged, he came in power. So if you find yourself alone, cut off, misunderstood, passed over, do not despise the moment. Do not curse the cave. You are in the place of preparation. You are in the place where the heavens open and truth descends. You are being pulled away, not to be forgotten, but to be filled. And when that moment comes, when the revelation is given, it will mark you forever. You will not return the same, because the ones who receive revelation are never the same as those who only hear information. And the price of that revelation is always the same: separation. Let the world see isolation, but let heaven see invitation. You are not being removed, you are being readied. For the voice that shakes the wilderness is about to speak, and you have been chosen to hear it. The wilderness is the workshop of destiny. It is not the place we would choose, but it is the place God chooses to shape those he has called. When God has a plan for your life that touches eternity, he does not prepare you in the palace. He prepares you in the wilderness. He doesn't forge warriors in banquet halls, but in barren places, where the comforts are stripped away and only the essentials remain. It is there, in the silence and solitude, that God begins to build what cannot be shaken. The wilderness is not punishment, it is process. It is the season where heaven's hand molds the soul. Destiny is not born in public, it is carved in private. And the carving is never comfortable. The wilderness reveals what you really believe. It exposes motives. It breaks down pride. It confronts illusions. In the wilderness, your gifts are not enough. Your charm fades and your strategies fail. You come to the end of yourself. But that is the very moment God begins. Moses was driven into the wilderness not as a failure, but as a man in formation. 40 years he wandered, not because God had forgotten him, but because God was preparing him. He wasn't just learning to lead sheep, he was learning to listen. He wasn't being disqualified, he was being qualified for something far greater than he could have imagined. And when the time came, the fire of God did not meet him in Egypt or in a temple, but in a bush in the wilderness, because the wilderness is where heaven meets earth in the most unexpected ways. Israel, too, passed through the wilderness, and though it looked like a detour, it was by divine design. Before they could walk in the promise, they had to walk through the process. The wilderness stripped them of Egypt. It trained them in dependence. Manna from heaven, water from the rock, daily miracles in a dry land. Why? So they would know that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. The wilderness taught them what the promise could not. Even the voice of John the Baptist, the one who prepared the way for the Messiah, was not raised in the synagogues, but in the wilderness. He was clothed in camel's hair, eating locusts and honey, far from the crowds. Why? Because God births prophetic voices in barren places. And the very power of John's message came from where it was forged, far from man's approval, but close to heaven's fire. When you are in the wilderness, you feel forgotten. You feel lost, but you are not lost. You are being led. The same Spirit that drove Jesus into the wilderness is the Spirit that leads you. And the same Jesus who came out in power after 40 days is forming that power in you. It is in the lonely places that faith becomes real. It is in the silence that the word takes root. And it is in the heat of the wilderness that your destiny is tested and proven. So do not despise the wilderness. It is the workshop of heaven. It is where foundations are laid, character is formed, and vision is refined. It is where you are stripped so that you may be strengthened. It is where destiny is not just given, but forged. If you are in the wilderness, you are in good company, for it is there that God shapes his messengers. It is there he prepares his chosen, and when the time is right, you will emerge not broken, but built. Not empty, but empowered. Because in the wilderness, God is not absent. He is crafting your calling with his own hands. Isolation is God's method of sanctification. It is not merely a circumstance, it is a strategy. When God truly sets someone apart for himself, he first separates them from everything else. It is not isolation for isolation's sake. It is for the purpose of holiness. Sanctification means to be made holy, to be set apart for a divine purpose. And before God can use someone publicly, he must cleanse them privately. That cleansing, that refining, often begins in the quiet, painful space of isolation. We tend to fear isolation. It feels like rejection. It feels like abandonment. It feels like failure. But in the eyes of heaven, isolation is often a signal of intimacy. God removes you from the crowd so he can deal with your heart. He pulls you out from the noise so his voice can be heard. It is in the isolation that the work of sanctification begins, not in the presence of many, but in the presence of one. Consider Joseph. Before he wore the robe of authority in Egypt, he wore the chains of betrayal in prison. He was thrown into a pit by his brothers and later locked away in a dungeon by strangers. Alone, forgotten, isolated. But while no man stood with him, God was with him. And in that place, Joseph was being refined. Pride was stripped away. Trust was deepened. Faith was sharpened. He was being sanctified, not just so he could handle power, but so he could carry God's purpose with integrity. Isolation was not his end, it was his sanctification. The prophet Jeremiah lived most of his life alone, not by choice, but by calling. God specifically told him not to marry, not to go to parties, not to mingle. Why? Because his life had to mirror the message. He was not only delivering the word of the Lord, he was the word of the Lord made visible. His isolation was his sanctification. God used the separation to purify his spirit, to mold his character, to make him a vessel that could carry truth to a rebellious nation. Even the Apostle Paul, after his dramatic encounter with Christ on the road to Damascus, did not immediately begin his ministry. Instead, he went into Arabia for a season, isolated, hidden, unknown, but not idle. In that season, the old Saul was dying, and the new Paul was being formed. The Pharisees' mindset was being uprooted, and the heart of a servant was being planted. It was a time of sanctification, preparing him to write the letters that would shape the church for generations. And what of Jesus? Before the miracles, before the crowds, before the cross, he withdrew often. Even at the height of his ministry, he would leave the multitudes and retreat to a mountain, to a solitary place, to be alone with the Father. His power was not sourced in the public stage, but in the private sanctuary. His holiness was not maintained by applause, but by communion. He showed us that isolation is not weakness, it is sacred space, a space where the soul is aligned with the will of God. So, if you find yourself isolated, do not rush to escape it. Lean into it. The hidden ones are the prepared ones. It may seem like you've been forgotten, overlooked, buried in obscurity, while others rise, speak, build, and are celebrated. But in the kingdom of God, hiddenness is never without purpose. God hides what he is preparing. He conceals what he is refining. Because the most powerful tools are not formed in the spotlight, they are forged in the shadows. There is a sacred preparation that happens when no one is watching. It is in the quiet seasons, the tucked-away places, that God works the deepest. Not all growth is visible. Not all anointing is loud. Some of the most powerful vessels God ever used were first hidden, and the longer the hiding, the greater the calling. You may be hidden, but you are not wasted. You may be silent, but you are not voiceless. God hides you because he is forming something in you that cannot be rushed. David was anointed to be king, yet he was not crowned that day. After the oil flowed on his head, he went back to the fields, alone with the sheep, unseen by men, but fully seen by God. It was in that hidden place that David learned to fight lions and bears. It was in the solitude that he wrote songs and developed intimacy with the Lord. So when Goliath appeared, David didn't panic. He was already prepared. Why? Because the field was his training ground. The hiding was his preparation. God does not rush his instruments. He is more concerned with depth than with speed. Consider Esther. She did not go straight to the throne. She underwent a full year of preparation, months of purification, months of training before she was presented to the king. Why? Because her mission wasn't just to be queen, it was to save a nation. That kind of purpose demands preparation. So she was hidden. And while the palace was silent, heaven was at work. Even Jesus, the Son of God, lived 30 years in near-complete obscurity. We know almost nothing of those decades, but we know they mattered, because before the miracles and the cross, he was a carpenter, hidden, ordinary in appearance, but every moment was part of the preparation. The hidden years were not lost years. They were foundational. Without them, the public ministry could not have stood. This is heaven's pattern. God hides what he values. He covers what he's cultivating. Just like a seed buried in the ground, the process of preparation is hidden beneath the surface. No one sees the roots growing. No one applauds the breaking of the outer shell. But when the time is right, what was buried begins to break through. Not because it was forgotten, but because it was ready. So if you are in a hidden season, do not despise it. Heaven is not in a hurry. God is more interested in who you are becoming than what you are producing. The hidden place is where pride dies, where dependence is born, where character is forged. It is where the shallow things are stripped away and the eternal things are planted deep. When God hides you, it is because He is trusting you with something sacred. He is preparing you to carry weight without collapsing. He is shaping you to endure storms without breaking. The hidden ones are the prepared ones. They emerge when the time is right, not a moment too soon. And when they step forward, they don't just make noise, they carry authority. They don't just shine, they carry light that came from fire in secret. So stay faithful, stay present in the hidden place, because what God does in you there is what will sustain you when He calls you out. Hidden now, but not forever. Prepared in secret, revealed in power. Heavenly calling demands earthly stripping. The higher the calling, the deeper the breaking. When God places His hand upon a life for something eternal, He begins not by adding, but by removing. He strips away the unnecessary, the impure, the untested, because what is divine cannot be carried in a vessel that is still full of self. What is eternal cannot be poured into a heart still tied to the temporary. God's calling comes with glory, but it also comes with fire. Stripping is not the part we talk about. It's the part we try to avoid. The season we don't post about. The pain we don't always understand. But if you are truly called, you will go through it. The call of God is not light, it is weight. And to carry that weight, God must first lighten you of what you were never meant to hold. He removes the pride. He removes the opinions of others. He removes the false security, the idols of comfort, the dependence on your own strength. It feels like loss, but it is gain. It feels like being emptied, but it is God making room. Look at Abraham. Abraham, before he could become the father of nations, he was called to leave everything, his home, his family, his culture, everything familiar. He wasn't just being relocated, he was being stripped. God was removing his identity from everything earthly so that his identity could be rooted in the promise. He couldn't carry the covenant while still holding on to the past. And so the stripping came first. The calling followed. Moses was stripped of the palace before he ever stood before Pharaoh. Once a prince, now a shepherd. Once powerful, now forgotten. But that wilderness wasn't failure, it was preparation. It was the place where Egypt was pulled out of him. The arrogance, the impulsiveness, the old ways had to die. And when the bush finally burned and the voice called out, Moses was no longer the man who once thought he could do it all on his own. He was now ready to lead, not in his strength, but in God's. Even Paul, the great apostle, testified of being stripped. After his encounter with Jesus, he lost everything: status, respect, community, even safety. Yet he called it all rubbish compared to the surpassing worth of knowing Christ. Why? Because the call of heaven had rewired his values. What once was gain became loss, and what once seemed like loss became the very path to glory. That is the way of the kingdom. And then there is Jesus, the highest calling of all. The Son of God did not ascend to the throne without first descending into suffering. He stripped himself of heavenly glory, took on flesh, endured rejection, mockery, pain, and the cross. He was not only called, he was crushed, because the redemption of the world demanded not just power, but sacrifice, not just a message, but a laying down. And in that complete stripping came complete victory. So when God begins to strip things from your life, do not mistake it for abandonment. It is evidence of calling. He is not taking to harm you, he is taking to make room. The stripping is not a sign that you're off course. It's often the confirmation that you're right where you're supposed to be. You're being prepared to carry something holy. and holiness cannot rest on cluttered hearts. The earthly must be stripped for the heavenly to take root. God cannot bless who you pretend to be. He blesses what remains after the fire. So let him take what he must. Let him refine what he will, because what he's calling you to is greater than what he's removing. And when the stripping is finished, you will stand lighter, purer, stronger, ready not just to run, but to endure, ready not just to speak, but to carry his presence. Ready not just to speak, but to carry his presence. Look at the life of Jeremiah. Before he was born, God said, "I appointed you a prophet to the nations." But before he could speak to the nations, he had to accept the reality of being set apart. It meant standing alone. It meant delivering messages no one wanted to hear. But he could endure the rejection because he understood the assignment. He wasn't trying to be accepted. He was sent. Jesus himself was set apart, born of a virgin, hidden in Egypt, raised in obscurity, baptized in the wilderness. Every step of his life was intentional separation. Why? Because he was being prepared to be sent forth into a broken world with a message that would shake kingdoms and split history in two. He knew who he was. He knew why he came. And because of that, he could walk through rejection, betrayal, and the cross, knowing he was fulfilling what he had been set apart to do. The same is true for you. You were not set apart to stay hidden forever. You were set apart to be sent forth in power, with authority, with clarity. But only after the separation has done its work. God doesn't send half-formed vessels. He sends those who have been through the fire, those who have learned to hear his voice in silence, to trust his hand in darkness, to stand when no one applauds. These are the ones he trusts with assignments that shake the earth. You may not yet see the fullness of why you were set apart, but heaven sees it clearly. There are people waiting on the other side of your obedience. There are chains that will break because you stood up. There are destinies that will shift because you spoke what God placed in you. The world needs what you carry, but only after it has been refined in the secret place. So do not shrink back when the sending comes. Do not fear the weight of the call. If God has set you apart, he will equip you. If he has stripped you, he will clothe you. If he has hidden you, he will reveal you in his time. And when he sends you forth, it won't be with mere words. It will be with fire, with clarity, with divine backing. This is not the time to doubt who you are. This is the time to remember why you were called. You were not just saved, you were set apart. You were not just chosen, you were commissioned. The same hand that pulled you out is now pushing you forward. The world may not understand you, but heaven has appointed you. And when heaven sends you, no force on earth can stop you. You were set apart because you are sent forth. Now go in boldness, and don't look back.